question of like, what even is life?
Ah, one of the big ones.
Exactly. We'll be exploring how scientists classify all those crazy living organisms out there. Our main source is a lecture based on, get this, the Cambridge Biology textbook.
Oh, wow, going straight to the source.
You know it. So
Yeah.
get ready to unpack some serious biology. Think you're up for it.
Absolutely. It's a question that has puzzled, scientists and philosophers for centuries. And even today, with all our advances in biology, there's still this like element of mystery to it.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of mysteries, the source dives right into this thing called Mrs. Grin,
Oh,
which I gotta admit sounds more like a friendly neighbor than like a key to understanding life.
right. It's actually it's a mnemonic device to help remember the 7 characteristics that scientists generally agree are essential for something to be considered like truly alive.
Ooh, a checklist for life. I like it.
Yeah, so each letter in Mrs. Gren stands for one of those criteria: movement, respiration, sensitivity, growth, reproduction, excretion, and nutrition.
Okay, so to be officially alive, you gotta tick all those boxes.
Pretty much. It's not always black and white, and some organisms even kind of blur the lines, but generally speaking, yeah, all 7 need to be met.
Gotcha. So let's break down each of these characteristics, shall we? Starting with M for movement. I'm guessing this is about more than just like animals walking or birds flying,
You
right?
got it. Movement in biology, it's way broader than that. Even plants.
Really?
Oh, yeah, they exhibit movement too. Like a sunflower tracking the sun across the sky, or have you ever seen a Venus flytrap?
Oh, yeah. Snap and shut on those unsuspecting bugs.
Exactly.
So even things that seem totally still are actually moving in some way. Okay, what about R for respiration? I vaguely remember this from school.
Respiration, it's all about energy, really. How organisms obtain it and use it. So it's not just breathing, that's just taking in air. Respiration, it happens at the cellular level, breaking down nutrients to release energy.
So it's like the fuel for all life processes.
Exactly. It's the engine that powers everything. And, it can look different across different life forms.
Oh, I bet.
Fish use gills to get oxygen from water, while, well, we use lungs to breathe air.
Right, makes sense. Okay, on to S for sensitivity. What does it even mean for an organism to be sensitive?
Basically, it's about how an organism reacts to changes in its surroundings,
Yeah.
both inside and outside the body. Like, think about how our bodies regulate temperature.
Oh, yeah, we sweat when it's hot and shiver when it's cold.
Exactly. That's homeostasis in action. Keeps our internal environment stable. And of course, plants do their own thing too.
Oh, right. They have to respond to their environment as well.
Absolutely. They adjust their growth to get more sunlight or even have defenses to avoid being eaten.
That's pretty clever. Okay, G for growth. Pretty self-explanatory, right? Things get bigger.
Well, yeah, but there's a little more to it. In biology, we're talking about a permanent increase in size and complexity.
So, like, a pufferfish puffing itself up wouldn't count.
Nope, that's temporary. Real growth has to be, an actual increase in mass and organization. And measuring that can get tricky sometimes.
Yeah, I can imagine. Especially for things that change shape a lot.
Exactly. Sometimes it's simple, length or weight. But other times you need special techniques, like measuring dry mass, which takes out the water content.
Wow, okay. Now, on to R for reproduction. Seems pretty essential for, well, keeping a species going.
Absolutely. It's about creating new individuals, ensuring the survival of the species across generations. But there's a bit of a nuance here. The offspring don't necessarily have to be fertile.
Oh, right, like that example with the horse, the donkey, and the mule.
Exactly. Mules, they're infertile, right?
Yeah?
So even though a horse and a donkey can make offspring, they're still considered different species because their offspring can't reproduce themselves.
So it's not just about making any babies. It's about making babies that can make more babies. Okay, E for excretion. Not the most glamorous topic, uh-huh.
No, not really. But it's essential. Excretion, it's just getting rid of waste products, stuff produced during metabolism.
Okay, so like pee and poop.
Yeah, that's part of it. But it's broader than that. Even the oxygen that plants make during photosynthesis, that's a form of excretion.
Really? I never thought of it like that.
They're releasing excess oxygen they don't need. So it's not just about getting rid of the bad stuff, it's about maintaining a balance.
Gotcha. All right, last but not least, N for nutrition. Basically, everything's got to eat, right?
Yeah, that's the basic idea. Nutrition, it's how organisms get the stuff they need for energy, for growth, for repair. And this can look really different depending on what kind of organism we're talking about. Plants use sunlight and nutrients from the soil, while animals, well, they eat other things.
Right, from tiny bacteria absorbing nutrients to a giant blue whale filtering krill, everyone needs fuel. So, to sum it all up, if you want to be classified as alive, you got to check off all those Mrs. Gren boxes, right?
Yep, all or nothing.
So, even if something like moves and grows and reacts but doesn't reproduce or get rid of waste, it's not considered alive.
Exactly. The source actually had a great analogy. Imagine an alien, right?
Okay.
And it encounters a bird and an airplane for the first time.
Okay, I can picture it.
The alien might notice that both the bird and the airplane, they move, they consume fuel, they even have some sort of waste removal.
But the airplane doesn't reproduce or grow on its own.
Exactly. Our alien friend, with its handy Mrs. Gren checklist, would realize that the airplane, while pretty cool, isn't actually alive.
That's a great analogy. Okay, so once we've figured out something is alive, how do scientists even begin to organize all the incredible diversity of life on Earth? There's like millions of different species, right?
Millions. That's where classification comes in. Grouping organisms based on their ancestry and characteristics. And it all starts with the idea of a species.
Didn't we kind of touch on that with the horse and donkey example?
Yeah, remember, a species is a group of organisms that can reproduce with each other, and their offspring have to be fertile.
Right, the mule. But with so many species out there, how do they even name them all? Seems like it would get confusing fast.
Well, that's where the binomial system comes in. It's like a universal naming system. Each species gets a two-part scientific name, like a first and last name for every organism.
Oh, right, like Homo sapiens for us humans.
Exactly. Homo's the genus, a broader group, and sapiens is the specific species name. It's a system that, brings order to the chaos.
Love it. Keeps things organized. But how do scientists actually figure out how organisms are related? Is it all about how they look?
It used to be. But these days, we rely a lot on DNA analysis. You compare the DNA sequences of different organisms, and that tells you how closely related they are.
So the more similar the DNA, the closer the relationship.
You got it. DNA is like the instruction manual for life, so it makes sense. Of course, before DNA technology, scientists had to rely on more traditional methods.
Like what?
Well, they would observe and compare observable characteristics like morphology, that's the external features, shape, structure, that kind of thing.
Okay, and what else?
Anatomy, that's looking at the internal structure, bones and organs. And then there's biochemistry, which is all about the chemical makeup of the organism.
Mm-hmm.
And even like their behavior and where they live geographically.
Wow, so they were like detectives piecing together clues. Can you give me an example of how that worked?
Sure, imagine scientists looking at bats and birds, right? They both have wings and fly. But if you look closer at their anatomy...
You'd notice they're actually pretty different.
Exactly. Bats have those membranous wings supported by long finger bones, while birds, they have feathers and a completely different bone structure.
So even though they both fly, their wings evolved totally independently.
Precisely. And by looking at those differences, scientists could figure out that bats and birds, even though they might seem similar, they're actually on different branches of the evolutionary tree.
Okay, that makes sense. But with so many branches and connections, how do scientists even visualize these relationships? It must be more complicated than a simple family tree.
Oh, way more complicated. They use something called a classification tree. It's a diagram, like a branching diagram, that shows how different organisms are related evolutionarily.
I'm picturing a tree, roots at the bottom, branches growing upwards.
Exactly. The root, that's like the common ancestor where everything started. Then as you go up the branches, you see how different lineages evolved and branched off. Each branching point, we call it a node, that represents a common ancestor for all the organisms above it on the tree.
So the closer two species are on the tree, the more closely related they are.
Exactly. And the length of the branches matters too. Shorter branches mean a more recent common ancestor, so a closer relationship.
It's like a visual map of how everything's connected. Super cool. But I have to admit, I think staring at a giant classification tree would be a little overwhelming for me. Is there a more hands-on way to figure out what a specific organism is?
Oh, absolutely. That's where dichotomous keys come in.
Dichotomous keys, what are those?
It's like a step-by-step guide to identify an organism. Like, imagine a detective solving a case.
Ooh, I like it.
So dichotomous just means dividing into two. So the key gives you a series of paired choices about the organism. You pick the one that matches what you see, and it leads you to the next set of choices and so on.
So you keep narrowing it down until you find the right answer, like a choose-your-own-adventure for identifying organisms.
Exactly. It's a really structured way to navigate all that diversity.
I love it. Okay, so we've talked about how individual species are named and how we can visualize the relationships, But how do scientists group organisms at a broader level?
That's where kingdoms come in, the major categories for classifying life. They sit right below domains in the hierarchy.
So, if domains are like the continents of life, kingdoms are the countries.
That's a great analogy. And we have 5 major kingdoms to explore: animals, plants, fungi, protists, and prokaryotes.
Wow, a whole world tour of life. Okay, let's start with animals since that's what we're most familiar with.
Right.
What makes an animal an animal?
Animals, they're multicellular, they don't have cell walls, and they have to eat food for energy. They can't make their own food like plants.
So they're always on the move, searching for their next meal. Okay, what about plants? They seem to have a completely different strategy.
They do. Plants are also multicellular, but their cells have walls made of this tough stuff called cellulose. And most importantly, they can make their own food through photosynthesis.
Right, they're the ultimate self-sufficient organisms. Okay, what about fungi? I always think of mushrooms, but I know there's way more to them than that.
Oh, absolutely. Fungi are fascinating. They have cell walls, but not like plants. And they get their nutrients by absorbing them from, like, decaying organic matter.
So they're the recyclers of the ecosystem. Now, on to the more mysterious ones. Protists. What makes them so unique?
Protists, they're a mixed bag, really. Some are plant-like, some are animal-like, some have cell walls, some don't. Some can photosynthesize, others need to eat. They kind of defy easy classification.
So they're the rebels of the eukaryotic world. And finally, prokaryotes. What sets them apart?
Prokaryotes are mostly unicellular, and they don't have a nucleus. Their DNA just floats around inside the cell. They also have cell walls, but not made of cellulose.
So they're the simplest cells, but still super important. Thinking about all the bacteria out there. Okay, we've covered the 5 kingdoms, but what about viruses? Where do they fit in?
Ah, viruses.
Oh,
That's where
no.
things get really interesting. They don't actually fit neatly into any of the 5 kingdoms
Right.
because they don't meet all the criteria we talked about.
Wait, really? But viruses can cause diseases, they can spread, they can evolve. How are they not alive?
It's a real head scratcher. They're basically just packets of genetic material inside a protein coat. They can't reproduce on their own or do any of those metabolic processes we talked about. They need to hijack a host cell to do any of that.
So they're like tiny pirates invading cells and stealing their resources.
Exactly. They challenge our very definition of life, forcing us to reconsider what it means to be a living thing.
This is blowing my mind. I'm so curious to learn more about viruses and how they impact life. But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's zoom back in on one kingdom in particular: animals. I'm ready to explore the incredible diversity within this group.
All right, let's do it. One of the first big distinctions we make with animals is between vertebrates and invertebrates.
Oh yeah, the backbone crew versus the no backbone crew.
Exactly. And get this, invertebrates make up like 95% of all animal species.
Whoa, really? They're the majority. But let's start with the vertebrates, since those are probably more familiar than most people.
Yeah.
What are the main groups?
There are 5 main classes: fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Each one has its own set of adaptations for thriving in different environments.
Makes sense. Okay, let's start with fish, the original vertebrates.
Yeah, they've been around the longest. They have scales for protection, gills for breathing underwater, fins for swimming, and they lay their eggs in water.
Streamlined for life underwater. What about amphibians? They always seem to be living a double life between water and land.
Exactly. They have that thin, moist skin, and like fish, their eggs are laid in water. But the cool thing is they go through metamorphosis.
Oh, right, from tadpoles to frogs?
Yep, they transform from aquatic larvae with gills to land-dwelling adults with lungs. Pretty amazing.
It's like a complete makeover. Now on to reptiles. What makes them fully terrestrial?
They've got scaly skin that helps them conserve moisture on land. And their eggs, they have tough, leathery shells that can survive outside of water.
So they're not tied to water for reproduction anymore. Okay, what about birds? They're pretty unique with their feathers and flying abilities.
Absolutely. Feathers, they're amazing. They provide insulation, they help with flight, and they're important for attracting mates. Birds also have beaks which come in all shapes and sizes depending on what they eat. And like reptiles, they lay hard-shelled eggs.
It's wild to think that birds evolved from reptiles. All right, last but not least, mammals. What makes us so special?
Well, mammals, we have hair or fur for insulation.
Yeah.
We give birth to live young, and females have mammary glands to produce milk. Plus, we have specialized teeth for different types of food.
We're a diverse bunch, that's for sure. But we can't forget about the invertebrates, the majority of animal life. And when I think of invertebrates, the first thing that pops into my head is arthropods. They're everywhere.
You're telling me arthropods are the largest and most diverse group of animals on the planet. Jointed legs, tough exoskeletons, insects, spiders, crabs, lobsters. They're all part of this amazing phylum.
Okay, I'm ready for an arthropod crash course. What are the main groups we need to know?
Let's focus on four. Insects, crustaceans, arachnids, and myriapods. Each one has its own little quirks that make it unique. Starting with insects, the most numerous group, they pretty much rule the land.
Yeah, I can believe that. What makes an insect an insect?
They've got 3 pairs of jointed legs, that's their signature. And they usually have 2 pairs of wings, although some have lost them over time. They breathe through these little tubes called tracheae.
Small but mighty. What about crustaceans? I'm picturing crabs scuttling sideways on the beach.
Yep. Crustaceans are mostly aquatic, although some live on land. They've got more than 4 pairs of legs, sometimes a lot more, and 2 pairs of antennae for sensing their surroundings.
So lots of legs and sensitive antennas. What about arachnids? I'm not going to lie, spiders kind of freak me out.
I get it. But spiders are just one type of arachnid. You've also got scorpions, ticks, mites. Arachnids have 4 pairs of legs and no antenna.
So spiders, scorpions, ticks, all 8-legged and no antenna. Got it. Okay, what about myriapods? I don't know much about them.
Myriapods. Those are your centipedes and millipedes. They've got these long, segmented bodies with tons of legs. Hence the name myriapod, meaning many feet. And they have 1 pair of antennae.
So if it's got what seems like a million legs, it's probably a myriapod. We've explored the incredible diversity of the animal kingdom, but I'm ready to switch gears and dive into the world of plants.
Sounds good. The plant kingdom, we can divide it into 2 main groups, flowering plants and non-flowering plants.
Okay, that seems straightforward enough. What are some examples of non-flowering plants?
Ferns are a classic example. They have those beautiful fronds, but no flowers. They reproduce using spores. You know those brown spots you see on the underside of fern fronds?
Oh yeah, I always thought those were some kind of disease or something.
Nope, those are spore cases called sori.
So instead of using pollinators like bees and butterflies, they just release their spores into the wind and hope for the best.
Pretty much. It seems risky, but it's worked for them for millions of years. Spores are tough little things. They can travel far and wide, and they don't need fertilization like seeds do.
Wow, so they're like tiny plant pioneers? Amazing. But we can't forget about the flowering plants. They're incredibly successful and diverse. We talked a bit about monocots and dicots, but I want to learn more about their adaptations, especially when it comes to reproduction. What are some of the strategies that have made them so successful?
They've got a whole arsenal of tricks. One of the most amazing is their partnerships with animals for pollination.
Oh yeah, like those hummingbirds and those bright red flowers.
Exactly. The colors, the scents, the shapes of flowers, they're all designed to attract specific pollinators.
It's like they're putting on a show for the bees and butterflies.
They are. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
The animals get food, and the plants get their pollen spread around so they can reproduce.
It's like a perfectly choreographed dance. What about seed dispersal? How do they make sure their seeds get spread out to avoid competition and colonize new areas?
Oh, they've got some clever tricks for that, too. Some seeds, they have structures that help them catch the wind, like dandelion seeds with their little parachutes. Others hitch a ride on animals, either by sticking to their fur or by being eaten and,
Pooping them out somewhere else.
Exactly. And some seeds, they even travel by water.
So they've got windsurfers, hitchhikers, boaters, all sorts of ways to get around. It's amazing how much evolution has shaped these strategies for survival. Are scientists finding any new ways that seeds get dispersed?
Oh, all the time. For example, some plants can actually launch their seeds, like with explosive force.
Oh, what?
Yeah, they use built-up pressure inside the fruit to shoot the seeds out, like a little botanical cannon.
That's incredible. Plants are way cooler than I thought.
Yeah.
So we've got plants casting their spores to the wind, using animals to spread their pollen, and launching their seeds with explosive force. It's amazing how dynamic they really are.
It is. Plants are constantly interacting with their environment, evolving these amazing strategies to survive.
Okay, I'm definitely feeling a renewed sense of awe for nature. But I also have to admit, I'm a little overwhelmed by all this diversity. How do we even wrap our heads around it all?
Well, that's where the concept of biodiversity comes in. It's about appreciating the incredible variety of life on Earth at all levels, from the genes within a species to the different ecosystems across the planet. It's about recognizing that everything's interconnected.
So it's not just about how many species there are, it's about understanding how they're all linked together.
Exactly. Biodiversity is essential for a healthy planet. It makes life more resilient, more adaptable, and it provides us with all these essential services like clean air and water, food, medicine.
It's like a giant, intricate tapestry, and we need to protect it.
Well said. Biodiversity is a treasure.
Biodiversity is definitely something we need to be more aware of. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already, from those 7 criteria of life to kingdoms and how scientists classify everything.
We have.
It's a lot to take in, but there's still so much more to explore within each of these kingdoms, right?
Absolutely.
Where should we go next?
Well, we just started to uncover the world of plants, and I think those non-flowering varieties deserve a little more attention.
Yeah, they kind of get overshadowed by the flashy flowering plants.
They do, but they've got a long and fascinating history and some pretty remarkable adaptations.
Okay, I'm all ears. We talked about ferns briefly, but I want to dive deeper. What makes them so special?
Well, ferns are like living fossils, relics from a time when Earth was a totally different place. They evolved over 360 million years ago, way before flowering plants.
Wow, they were around when dinosaurs roamed the earth. But if they don't have flowers, how do they reproduce?
Ah, that's the cool part. Ferns have a totally unique way of doing things. They reproduce through spores, these tiny single-celled structures that get released into the wind. Remember those brown spots on the underside of fern fronds?
Oh, yeah, I thought those were some kind of disease.
Nope, those are spore cases, called sori.
So instead of relying on pollinators, they just chuck their spores into the wind and hope they land somewhere good.
It's a pretty effective strategy, actually. Spores are super resilient, they can travel far, and they don't need fertilization like seeds do.
So they're like little plant adventurers, ready to take root wherever they land.
Exactly. It's amazing how they've persisted for so long with this completely different reproductive strategy.
Ferns are way more impressive than I realized. But speaking of impressive, we can't forget about the flowering plants. We talked a bit about monocots and dicots, but I'm curious about their adaptations for reproduction. What makes them so successful?
They've got a whole bag of tricks, and a lot of it involves these amazing partnerships with animals.
Oh, yeah, like those hummingbirds and bright red flowers we talked about.
Exactly. The colors, the scents, the shapes of flowers, it's all designed to attract specific pollinators.
It's like they're putting on a show to attract the bees and butterflies.
They are. And it's mutually beneficial. The animals get food, and the plants get their pollen spread around to other flowers, which allows them to reproduce.
So it's a win-win for everyone. It makes me wonder how these partnerships even started in the first place. Like, was it just a random thing, or was there some kind of pressure that led to these relationships?
That's a great question. It's probably a bit of both. As flowering plants evolved, they started offering new opportunities for animals looking for food. And as animals started visiting these flowers, they accidentally helped with pollination, which gave those plants an advantage. So over time, these relationships just became more and more refined.
It's amazing how these little interactions can have such a big impact on evolution. It reminds us that every creature plays a role. What about seed dispersal? How do plants make sure their seeds get spread out, to avoid competition and find new places to grow?
Oh, they've got some clever ways of doing that too. Some seeds have structures that help them catch the wind, like dandelion seeds with their little parachutes or maple seeds with their wings.
Right.
Others, they hitch a ride on animals. Some have hooks or barbs to cling to fur. Others get eaten and then,
They get pooped out somewhere else. It's the circle of life.
exactly. And some seeds even travel by water.
So we've got windsurfers, hitchhikers, boaters, all sorts of travel options for seeds. It's incredible how evolution has shaped all these different strategies. Are scientists still finding new ways that seeds get dispersed?
All the time. There are always new discoveries. For instance, did you know that some plants can actually launch their seeds?
Launch them, like ow.
They use built-up pressure inside the fruit to basically shoot the seeds out, like a little catapult.
No way. That's amazing.
It is. It just goes to show that plants are way more dynamic than we often give them credit for.
I'm starting to see plants in a whole new light. Okay, so we've got plants casting their spores to the wind, using animals to spread their pollen, and launching their seeds like tiny missiles. It's amazing how much is going on in the plant world.
It is. It's easy to forget how active they really are, always interacting with their environment and evolving new ways to survive.
Okay, I'm feeling a renewed sense of wonder for nature. But I also have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all the diversity we've talked about. Is there a way to, make sense of it all? To zoom out and see the bigger picture?
That's where the concept of biodiversity comes in. It's about recognizing and appreciating all the different forms of life on Earth at every level, from the genes within a species to all the different ecosystems across the planet.
So it's not just about how many different species there are, but about how they're all interconnected.
Exactly. Biodiversity is essential for a healthy planet. It makes life more resilient, more adaptable, and it provides all those services that we depend on, like clean air, water, food, medicine.
It really is like a giant, intricate tapestry, and every part is important.
Well said. Biodiversity is a treasure, and we need to protect it.
Absolutely. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground already, exploring how scientists classify all those amazing living organisms. We've talked about the basic building blocks of life, the different kingdoms, and all those incredible adaptations. But there's one group we keep coming back to, a group that really pushes the boundaries of what we consider alive: viruses.
Ah, yes, viruses. They're a real mystery.
They are, and I'm ready to face them head on. Let's unravel the mysteries of these tiny but powerful entities.
Let's do it. Viruses may be small, but their impact on life is huge. They've played a major role in shaping evolution, and they're still teaching us so much about biology.
Okay, viruses. I gotta admit, they kind of freak me out. They're like so tiny, but they can cause so much trouble.
They're pretty amazing, aren't they? They really challenge how we think about life. They're so simple in structure, basically just some genetic material wrapped in a protein coat.
Right. But despite that, they have this huge impact on life. I mean, we've all experienced it, from colds to, more serious stuff. How do they even work? Like, how do they get inside our cells and mess things up?
Well, they're really good at, like, exploiting how cells work. They attach to a host cell, inject their genetic material, and then basically hijack the cell's machinery to make more viruses.
So they turn our cells into virus factories. That's kind of scary. But where did they even come from in the first place?
That's $1 million question.
Hmm.
Scientists have been debating that for a long time, and there's still no definitive answer. There are a few different theories, though.
Okay, let's hear them.
One idea is that viruses evolved from cellular organisms, but they basically got rid of all the extra stuff they didn't need and became super streamlined for a parasitic lifestyle.
So, like, they simplified themselves to focus on just replicating and spreading?
Exactly. Another theory is that they came from pieces of genetic material that escaped from cells and somehow learned to replicate on their own.
Oh, wow, that's wild.
It is. And then there's this even more mind-blowing theory that suggests viruses might be like remnants of pre-cellular life forms.
Wait, so they could be older than cells themselves?
That's the idea. It would mean that viruses are like these ancient relics from the very early stages of life on Earth.
Whoa, okay, my mind is officially blown. So we've got these mysterious entities that can hijack cells, cause diseases, and maybe even hold clues to the origin of life itself. But besides causing trouble, do viruses do anything, like, good in the world?
They do, actually. It might seem surprising, but they play a really important role in ecosystems.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
Well, they help control populations of bacteria and other microorganisms.
So, like, they keep things in balance.
Exactly. Without viruses, certain bacteria could just take over, and that would disrupt the whole ecosystem.
It's crazy to think that something so tiny can have such a big impact. What about their role in evolution? Have they influenced how life has changed over time?
Definitely. They can transfer genetic material between different organisms.
Yeah.
It's called horizontal gene transfer.